Okay, let's just dive right into this explainer. We're traveling way back to ancient Greece to witness a high-stakes, literally life-or-death trial of a guy who's basically considered one of the founding fathers of Western philosophical thought. I'm talking, of course, about Socrates. But here's the thing, this wasn't just the trial of a single man. It was actually the trial of an entirely new way of thinking.
It's a pretty fascinating question, isn't it? I mean, why would a society that we revere today for its amazing contributions to art, culture, and early democracy actually want to execute a philosopher? To us now, a philosopher just sitting around thinking doesn't sound very threatening at all, but we really have to understand the dramatic stakes here. A huge number of everyday Athenians genuinely believed this man was a highly dangerous enemy of the state. Like, they viewed him as a literal threat to the very fabric of their society.
So, if we look at the official record, the formal charges brought against Socrates were basically twofold. First up, they accused him of corrupting the youth of Athens. And second, they said he refused to recognize the gods that the state recognized, and that he was introducing these weird new divinities instead. Now, in antiquity, these were incredibly serious accusations. But these formal charges, they merely set the stage. They were really just the legal pretext for his trial, kind of masking his actual underlying offense, the thing that had been seriously annoying the powerful elite of Athens for years.
That's right. His real crime was quite simply asking way too many questions. See, Socrates wasn't feared because he walked around claiming to be some enlightened guru who had all the answers. It was the exact opposite. He absolutely loathed formal lectures. He hated the whole idea of just standing at a podium and talking at people. Instead, he made his mark and, well, made his enemies through this relentless, piercing, and sometimes highly uncomfortable style of questioning.
I know nothing at all. That was his famous stance. He would frequently just go up and engage complete strangers, or his friends, in these lengthy, winding conversations right out in the public square. They'd talk about massive, super complex topics, stuff like morality and society. But these weren't your typical debates where each side tries to score points, right? And Socrates would never offer any explicit advice. He claimed to know nothing. He would literally only respond to his conversation partner's answers with, you guessed it, more questions.
Now, what's really interesting here is that Socrates didn't actually view himself as a teacher, someone imparting wisdom from up on high. Instead, he described himself using this brilliant metaphor, a midwife. Just like a midwife doesn't give birth to the baby but helps the mother through the whole process, Socrates saw his inquiries as a way to assist others in giving birth to their own ideas. He was basically drawing out their deeply held, unexamined assumptions so they could finally look at them in the light of day.
All right, let's move into our first specific case study, the Euthydemus dialogue, where we'll be testing justice.
Because Socrates didn't actually write his own philosophy down, we have to rely on these fictional dialogues written by his deeply inspired students, like Plato and Xenophon, to actually see his method in action. In one really famous exchange, Socrates sits down with this young, very confident guy named Euthydemus. Now, Euthydemus believes he perfectly understands the absolute nature of justice and injustice. So, Socrates decides to test this. He starts probing the student's values by asking him to categorize specific actions. He asks about things like lying and theft. Naturally, Euthydemus confidently slaps lying and theft firmly onto side A, labeling them as strict injustices. No gray area. But then, Socrates drops a major hypothetical scenario right in his lap. And actually, let me ask you the exact same question he used to corner a student. Is it just for a general to deceive or pillage a hostile army? Think about that for a second. If lying and stealing are always unjust, then a general tricking the enemy to save his own city must be an unjust man, right? Boom. Euthydemus is suddenly totally trapped by his own absolute rules.
Realizing the pretty huge flaw in his initial logic, Euthydemus is forced to backtrack and revise his assertion. So he updates his worldview. He now claims that actions like deception and pillaging are completely just when they're done to enemies, putting them on side B, but they remain strictly unjust when done to friends, back on side A. He thinks he's completely solved the puzzle, but, well, Socrates isn't quite finished with him yet.
So Socrates delivers the final blow to the young man's shifting logic. He asks him to consider a brand new scenario. What if a military commander lies to his own troops, his friends, in order to boost their morale and basically save their lives? Well, before long, Euthydemus is completely despondent. It seems like every single answer he gives only leads to more problems. He realizes that actually he has absolutely no clue what constitutes justice anymore.
So let's break down how this crucial loop actually works in practice. Step 1, you draw out the unexamined assumption. Step 2, you challenge that exact bias with a targeted question.
Step 3, you eliminate the contradictory logic. And finally, Step 4, you just follow the inquiry where it leads, which often ends up being somewhere completely unexpected. The real brilliance here is that this process doesn't always give you definitive black and white answers, but it brilliantly clarifies the questions and strips away all that circular logic. Both the asker and the answerer walk away with a much more robust understanding.
Which brings us to the next part of this explainer, a tool for all fields, and the incredible legacy of inquiry.
Because this technique focuses heavily on the structure of logic rather than being limited by specific, rigid content, it couldn't just be contained to ancient Athens. The idea spread like wildfire. If we trace its historical spread, it reveals this incredible versatility across entirely different eras and completely different disciplines. We're talking moving from teaching clinical medicine during the Renaissance to tackling abstract faith right after the Protestant Reformation, all the way to 19th century American law schools, right up to the modern-day U.S. Supreme Court.
And this brilliantly illustrates the mechanics in action. Just look at some of these specific applications. In Renaissance medicine, a doctor wouldn't just hand a student the answer, they'd question the student's rationale for a specific diagnosis, moderating the discussion to produce conclusive results. Fast forward to 19th century law, and professors were challenging students with totally unforeseen hypothetical situations to explore judicial reasoning. And today, the Supreme Court uses it to imagine the unintended impacts of passing new laws. It even became absolutely essential to sciences like astronomy, botany, and math. Basically, it can be adapted to teach almost any topic that relies on critical reasoning. It's a real game changer.
Let's shift gears and look at the Socratic educator and the essential qualities they need.
While the method is incredibly adaptable, its success really heavily depends on the temperament of the person doing the asking. I mean, for this to work without completely alienating the student, an effective Socratic educator needs a very specific set of qualities. They obviously have to be well-versed in their subject, but crucially, rather than bullying their students or, showing off their big, superior intellect, they absolutely must remain modest. They need to be genuinely curious about the student's thought process, and they have to be affirming of every contribution, guiding the learner rather than crushing them.
But here is the grand historical irony of the whole shebang. Socrates, the very man who invented this method, actually lacked some of this essential modesty. Yeah, he may not have been the most subtle or affirming Socratic teacher out there. Historians actually believe he was deeply, deeply critical of Athens' particular brand of democracy. And well, he certainly wasn't shy about making those criticisms known to anyone who would listen.
And honestly, this lack of subtlety led directly to his downfall. He was known to pass his deep concerns and pretty subversive beliefs on to his followers. And over time, as you might expect, these beliefs were inevitably distorted in public forums. Ultimately, his teachings were thought to have inspired 2 of his pupils to actual treasonous ends. So suddenly, his critical questioning nature wasn't just seen as annoying anymore, the powers that be viewed it as highly subversive and a literal danger to the state.
Which brings us right back to where we started, the ultimate verdict.
Those unyielding beliefs and his absolute refusal to stop questioning the foundational assumptions of his society finally caught up to him. The jury sentenced him to death, but Socrates' legacy definitely wasn't defeated by that verdict. Artists throughout history depict him on his deathbed not in panic, but as a totally serene philosopher. Even facing his own execution, he remained ever curious to explore the ultimate question of mortality. And I think that leaves us with a really powerful final thought to take away. If the Socratic method teaches us anything, it's that real progress requires us to constantly question our own biases and our deeply held assumptions. So I'll leave you with this. What unexamined assumptions are you walking around with today, just waiting to be challenged?